Yeah, I can move closer. I don't know that I can do much else with my mic. Let me check some settings.
It'll get a little better once you get quiet here.
Yeah. Let's see.
Walt, can you turn up the audio just a touch? Thank you, sir. We'll turn it up internally too.
Okay, and I'll project also.
Okay, just hang tight. I'm gonna allow the chairman to get a few items of order out of the way, and then
Yeah.
we're underway here. We're all sitting here ready to gavel in. So I'm gonna put you in the chair, and then I'll introduce you here in just a minute. Okay?
Okay, thank you.
Just hang tight.
Yep.
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, sir.
Or Vice Chairman.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. All right, good evening. My name is Jamal Mosley, Acting Chairman of the Blythewood Planning Commission. The time is now 7:09 p.m. To our residents and loved ones watching online, watching the late YouTube stream, welcome to our February meeting. Could you please start the proceedings with roll call?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chair. Katasha, please say your last name so I didn't want to take a chance.
No, it's not. Hyacinth.
Hyacinth? Okay. Katasha Hyacinth?
Here.
Travis Smith? Didn't somebody say we saw it?
Right. I'd like to note that Mr. Smith was here, prepared for the
That's
meeting
right,
on
he had
time, but being that the council meeting ran over, I just wanted to be.
Understood, understood. Thank you. Nikki Schaffner?
Present.
Marcus Taylor?
Here.
Ken Coleman? Jamal Mosley?
Here.
Bill Tomes?
Here. All right, thank you. And could you please confirm that the agenda has been properly notified to the press and posted in accordance with state law?
Yes, sir, it was.
Thank you, sir. All right. Would all in attendance please join me and recite the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, if I may interject briefly.
Yes, sir.
We have a couple of amendments that we need to catch on the agenda at the forefront of the meeting. Amendment 1 will be to remove item number A, discussion and approval of final plat for Avenue Hills Estates Phase 3. A last-minute discovery on my part on Friday returned some items unmet for their application to move forward, so that would need to be removed. Also, we can replace that item with election of officers. That was an error on my part.
Yes, Mr. Sines, thank you for your attention to detail and catching that. And I will be more than happy to replace action item A, discussion and approval of the final plat for Avenue Hills Estate Phase 3 with nomination and election of officers.
Yes, sir.
All right.
I believe there's a motion on the floor. We'll need to make a motion and an action to amend the agenda.
I move the
I'll make the
agenda be
motion.
amended.
I'll second that.
Motion and second.
Okay, motion by Bill, second by Marcus.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
All right,
All right.
and be all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any nays? We're doing good already.
There you go.
Sounding a lot better. All right. And for those watching on YouTube, we apologize for our delay and being an hour late, so we're trying to catch up with things and restructure accordingly. Do we have any nominations for chairman?
Yeah, I'd like to make a nomination, Chair.
Mr. Chairman, just,
Yes, sir.
you're at item D.
Oh, yeah.
Proceed with item D for the minutes.
Yes,
Sorry,
my
sir.
apologies. So we'll now review and approve the minutes of our last meeting. If there are no corrections, may I receive a motion to approve the meeting minutes as presented?
I'll make a motion to approve.
Second.
Thank you. All right, we have a motion, we have a second. All in favor to the minutes as presented, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say no. All right, the previous minutes have been set into records, and we're going to move on to action item A, the nomination and election of officers. Do we have any nominations for chairman?
Yeah, I'll make a nomination for Jamal Mosley to be chair and Marcus Taylor to be vice chair.
Any additional nominations? If not, I accept my nomination. And we can proceed with the vote. Any alternate suggestions? All right. So at this time, we'll be voting to.
You got a motion on the floor. Is
I'll
anybody
need a
second? Oh, you second,
For
okay.
his nomination.
Okay.
I'll second. All right. So this time, we have a nomination for myself as chairman and Marcus Taylor as vice chair of the Planning Commission. We have a motion, we have a second. Now we'll take a vote. All in favor of those suggestions as stated, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say no. All right. Congratulations, Mr. Taylor, and thank you all
Congratulations, Mr. Jamal.
for having faith in me. All right. With that, let's move on to action item Bravo. And who do we have online for that?
It'd be Brian Mabry with the Kendall Keys Collaborative.
All right. Mr. Mabry, if you can hear me, we appreciate your patience and standing by for us, and we're excited to hear what you have to share with us.
If we can,
Could you give us a backstory on it?
I can. So action item B is discussion and approval and recommendation to the Blythewood Town Council, the 2025 Land Development Ordinance, otherwise known as the LDO, text and map amendments, updates per section 150-05 of the Blythewood Code of Ordinances. So as many of you are aware, Katasha maybe not as much, but it's been a pretty long journey this last couple years with the Land Development Ordinance for the town. This actually began with Carol Williamson, the prior administrator. When I came on board in October of 2023, I took over this project, and we have had numerous workshops throughout the process. We've had a pretty robust online engagement opportunity with the general town citizens and feedback opportunities. This ordinance rewrite draft sat on the town's website for 30 days. We sent out a lot of social media on how to make comment, how to provide feedback. Noticed that it was there. We did that on a weekly basis throughout that period. Surprisingly enough, we didn't get any feedback, so we actually give ourselves a pat on the back because we're like, well, we must be getting it pretty right then. Just a point of clarity, this land development ordinance is referred to as a rewrite, and it is a text and map amendment. However, we did not throw the old ordinance in the trash can and totally start from scratch. So it really, in its technical terms, is probably more of a very mass amendment to the old ordinance. And a lot of things we focused on was terms, and references of language and what I kind of refer to as planning jargon. We kind of simplified a lot of the terms and a lot of the language to make it easier to understand. We added a lot of graphics throughout the ordinance to make it user-friendly. We narrowed down, we had 20 or 21 zone districts for the little town of Blythewood, and we've narrowed those down to about 12 now. So consolidating redundancy is a lot of that. And then, of course, that would be where the map amendment would come in play. So where a zone district might have been called R8 at one time, it'll be called SR, but it'll be the same density factors, similar uses and all those kinds of things. On the more unique side, we did add some things like a arts district kind of component to kind of embody a little bit more of the cultural aspects for the town and give us a little bit of a roadmap of if somebody wants to do an art project with their development, what does it look like? What can they do? What's allowed? What's not allowed? So there's also a requirement on the development side. For example, any development business, a commercial development business that's over 15,000 square feet, for every so many square feet over that, they got to give so much money per square foot to go toward like an art project on that building, whether it be a mural or something of that nature, just to kind of bring a little bit of, a little bit of pizzazz, if you will, to the town. So those are some of the unique characteristics, but that's just a little bit of an overview. Brian Mabry has been with us, patiently waiting for over an hour, and we are probably going to owe him a couple lunches for this, but we are very appreciative of Kindred Keys Collaborative. They've been in this thing for the long haul with us. We have definitely got a big bang for our buck out of the situation, and they've been very responsive in this, so I want to recognize them. And just so we're clear, this recommendation tonight, barring no issues from the Planning Commission, would be y'all's formal recommendation to the Town Council, where we would start the first reading and then where we would end on a public hearing for final adoption. So those are kind of the steps we're at right now. Without any further ado, I want to introduce Brian Mabry. You'll have to turn we still don't have the front-facing screen, so
It's okay.
if you can rotate, he's going to walk us through a PowerPoint here that's going to kind of give an overview of the new ordinance, how to use it, and what's changed, and then we'll answer any questions along the way. So,
Thank you for that brief, sir.
no problem. Brian, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you, Daniel, and I'm going to try to be as loud as I can, and hopefully y'all can hear me. Probably when we do get to questions, it might probably end up being helpful if Daniel can kind of relay those to me verbally. I anticipate I might not be able to hear the commissioners too well, but we'll see. So again, Brian Mabry, Kindred Keys Collaborative, we're the firm that the town hired to do this update. I'm going to walk you through, as Daniel said, the very high points. This is a large document, and I can pretty much only cover the highlights at risk of people falling asleep if it gets too deep into the weeds, because zoning isn't the most glamorous or exciting thing, but it is important. So the way the land development ordinance is organized, basically the important things for casual users at the front, while the more detailed stuff that's for architects or attorneys or engineers toward the back. This document is to be an online document, native to online, as opposed to a PDF that's created from a Word document. So it's got a lot of user-friendly features in it, like if you hover over certain words that are defined, then that definition will pop up in a little bubble. If it says to refer to section 5.1 or something like that for landscaping provisions, then you click that reference to 5.1 and it'll take you right there. So again, this is a user-friendly 21st century document for 2025, so we're glad to have helped. There are several objectives and outcomes, and we'll pretty much kind of cover those as we're going through the process here, the presentation. As Daniel said, we're toward the end of the whole ordeal, with adoption taking place, we hope, quite soon from the town council. Oh, let me go back. It has been a lot of background work. This isn't just from a newly thought of thing. We started in, I want to say, mid or so 2023 with kicking off the project, producing several background documents like an annotated outline, and then we ended up doing the actual drafting of the new standards or changing your existing standards. Posted, that public review draft online for 30 days, and now we're, again into the public hearing stage of the whole process. So the town, like almost every town and city in the country that has zoning, has a comprehensive plan. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about the difference between a comprehensive plan and an LDO. Think of the comprehensive plan as the menu, and think of the LDO as a cookbook at a restaurant. So the comprehensive plan lays out broad objectives for how the town wants to grow in the future, but it does not have the force of law. It's not a legal document like an LDO is. It's got a lot of images in it and some descriptions of the different things that the restaurant offers, just like a comprehensive plan sort of lays the vision for how the town wants to grow. But the menu doesn't have instructions on how to cook something. And the LDO is really the instructions on how to cook something. It gets into the details of setbacks and building heights and landscape requirements and parking and all those kind of things. And so it's a very detail-oriented document, while the comprehensive plan is more of a visionary document. So some other things that a land development ordinance is, it's one consolidated document that houses most of the development-related regulations for the town. And it doesn't have like the building code as part of it and some other things like that, but it's got almost everything else you'd want related to development in a single document. And the advantage of doing that is it gets rid of, when you combine things together like that, with combining your zoning ordinance and your subdivision standards and your landscaping regulations and sign regulations all into one document, it helps to get rid of inconsistencies and duplications. Those can both be bad because just human nature, when in writing things out, you can when you repeat things, you might have different wording each time, and so it might mean slightly different things each time it's repeated, and we want to avoid that, this being a legal document. So getting rid of inconsistencies and duplications is important. Single source, like I said, for all kinds of standards and procedures. This makes it easier for Daniel and other staff members to administer and enforce and interpret when it's one single document, and it makes it easier for applicants and their representatives, if they're attorneys or their engineers or architects, to see what needs to be done to make a project go through the process in a streamlined way and meet all the requirements, if those requirements are clear and spelled out and are user-friendly to understand. So that's what an LDO is. Some items that a land development ordinance is not. It's not a property tax policy, so it doesn't set property tax rate or assess any particular properties in the town. It's not an annexation policy, so it doesn't lay out schedules or strategies for when certain areas outside the town should be annexed. It's not a capital improvements program, which is a budget and a schedule that many towns and cities and counties have for expanding their infrastructure, which is their streets and their utilities and sidewalks. It's not a building code, as I said earlier. It doesn't have to do with how many bathrooms a building has or what kind of electrical setup or HVAC setup it has, but it can and does have to do with how the exterior of the building is designed. It's not construction standards either, and those are the documents that say how streets are built as far as the base and the sub-base, the paving, the curb and gutter design, and things like that. And then finally, it's not like a property maintenance or nuisance code. It doesn't force someone to maintain their property in a safe way. Your town code might have something related to that in it, but the land development ordinance isn't that. It can, if someone's going to develop their property, it can require them to sort of clean it up in order to get their whatever new businesses they want to open there. But just a property sitting there vacant or in derelict condition, the LDO can't force that property owner to clean up. But again, there might be other rules that the town has related to that are not part of the LDO. Just some visuals for what the LDO can regulate, and these are not supposed to be and are not from Blythewood or from South Carolina. They are just stock sort of images that we've gathered over time to help illustrate certain concepts. So what an LDO can control is how land is used, whether it's a mix of different land uses in an area or all the same, like all single family in an area that's zoned for single family. Control if and how much open space is set aside in a new development. So there might be rules that require the creation of parks or other open space. And then there's some districts that might not have open space requirements there. It controls residential density, which is expressed in terms of dwelling units per acre. So apartments could have a higher density and single family would have a lower density. It can control how tall buildings can be and where they are on a lot. So in a typical downtown setting, you might have varying heights that vary from building to building, but those buildings are often very close to the street. While in a more suburban setting, there on the bottom, the heights are probably going to be a little more consistent for residences, and they're going to be set back farther from the street than what you would see like in a downtown setting or a downtown district. A few more things that a land development ordinance can control is parking, whether it's spaces based on the floor area of the building, or spaces based on, like in the instance of like an oil change or something like that, the number of spaces required per bay. It can control, as I said earlier, that how the outside of a building is designed, whether it's, you know, on the left there, not quite probably as attractive as what some people would want to see, with kind of a boxy look, versus having visual interest, having articulation, changes in material, and those kind of things that can make a building more attractive or more interesting to look at. And then finally, on the right there, it can control the amounts of landscaping required. So whether there are parking lot islands with landscaping in it and with buffering around the edges and those kind of things, versus just paved over parking areas with no landscaping and that kind of thing. We're avoiding that lower image there. We wouldn't really want that to be an outcome of this updated land development ordinance. So there's a good amount of landscaping requirements in this document. Here is an overall table of contents at the chapter level for this land development ordinance. There's 10 chapters. I'll be touching on each of these, but again, you know, this is an overview of a very lengthy document, so it'd be difficult to cover everything, but I'll do what I can. So chapter 1 has the purposes of the land development ordinance. You know, it lays out why the town is adopting LDO based on protection of the public health, safety, and welfare, enhanced economic development, livability, community character, those kind of things. It also establishes the jurisdiction of the LDO. You know, it applies within the town limits of Blythewood, not in the county. And those kind of things are what chapter 1 deals with. Chapter 1 is fairly boilerplate. You would see very similar provisions at any different LDO in different parts of the country or in the state. Chapter 2 sets up the different zoning district. These are laid out in a table in the LDO. We've, you know, reworked some of the naming conventions of the zoning districts so that you've got, instead of like R12 or R5 or R40, we've got more descriptive names like rural, suburban residential, and semi-urban residential. Each of those districts is tied to a future land use category in the comprehensive plan and on your future land use map, so that those areas on the future land use map and the comp plan that are low density are appropriate for the suburban residential zoning district, as you can see in sort of that middle row there. Each of the residential districts has a development type within it, and those three types are conventional, cluster, and planned. You can sort of think of those as sort of sub-districts within a zoning district that have different kinds of open space and density among them, and they are sort of at the option of the developer which one that the developer wants to use, depending on how much kind of open space is available to preserve, and how much density or units per acre the developer wants to get out of the project. I've got a slide coming up next that explains a little more the conventional versus cluster versus planned development types. So conventional is the first one there, and this is just a conceptual drawing of things. This isn't any specific planned site within the town. It's just conceptual. It shows, there on the left, a small amount of open space. The private property is larger lots, so any kind of open space is really going to be on the private property, which is represented by the sort of brown area, while the pale yellow is the open space area set aside. In the middle is a cluster. You can see there's a lot more open space dedicated, and in exchange for that, the developer gets more lots out of it. There's a few more lots in the middle image than there is on the left image. And then finally, planned has even more open space, and they get a little bit even more density out of it in exchange for having set aside that permanent open space for the community to enjoy. So taking the suburban residential district as an example, those three different development options within it have three different lot sizes: 20,000 square feet, 12,000 square feet, and 8,000 square feet. As you go down that list, you'll see there in the column that says common open space here. I don't know, hopefully my pointer is showing up. There more, you go down the list, the more open space is required. So the conventional at 20,000 square feet lot area doesn't require any open space. But then when you get to cluster, you get a smaller lot, and therefore a developer could have more units in the development, but he's got to set aside 20% of the site as open space. Then finally, the planned version, if there's an 8,000 square foot minimum lot size, but the developer has to set aside 30% of that development as common open space. And the open space, just like in the images before on the slide previous, are for the entire development. You're not talking about being, open areas on individual platted lot. So that works out to 2 units per acre with no open space, 2.5 units per acre with 20% open space. And then in that planned option, again, 3 units per acre, but 30% set aside open space. And this is a solution we've used other places that has been we believe, a success. Just going through some of the other, or all of the other non-residential districts, not as much detail on these, but there's suburban commercial, auto urban commercial, town center, mixed use, hospitality. There's heavy industrial and light industrial, office park, business campus. And then there's 2 special purpose districts, which are architectural overlay, which has a good amount of time has been spent, especially by Daniel and some Board of Architectural Review members on reworking that, as well as a planned development district, which is what you've had before, where if none of the other districts works out for an applicant, then they can pursue the planned development and do something unique. We hope that the districts allow for a decreased use of planned developments. I don't know how much they're used now, but sometimes we just completely get rid of planned developments in a LDO. But we're keeping them in there based on what you already have. And again, they might be used less if our districts are nice and flexible. Chapter 2 also has a use table, and there's several characteristics to show on the use table. On the use table, a P means the use is permitted by right in that particular district. A C means it's a conditional use, and an S means it's a special exception use that the Zoning Board of Adjustment has to take action on. So all the zoning districts are listed in columns on the use table. So there you've got the RU, the SR, the SU that we showed in the residential districts, and then all the non-residential districts are listed as well. There as columns. Then each of the rows is land uses. So financial institution, for example, is part of is listed in this excerpt. This is just an excerpt from the use table. It's not the entire thing. But financial institution, as an example, is a particular use as part of the office grouping of use categories. So going across the row, there you can see there that contractor's office in this example, there's dashes there under the residential districts, which means, that's not an allowed use in that district. But then when you get to the non-residential districts, it's shown as a C, which means that's a conditional use, or it's allowed with conditions that have to be met, and that can be administratively approved. If there had been an S there in these cells, that would have meant that it needs to go to the ZBA for their final action. They could approve or deny it based on after holding a public hearing. There are use categories in this document as well, which help to shorten the use table we were just looking at. When we say office, there's, 25, 20 different land uses in there that make up, the term office. And a lot of those are just on one row in the use table. It makes it a lot shorter and easier to read than a ton of land uses listed out that are all basically going to be treated the same and allowed in the same zoning districts. Also in the use categories, there are accessory uses that are listed out and shown as permissible in association with these primary uses that are listed on the left where the number 2 is. We also have accessory use and structure standards for things like sheds or pools or other accessory standards like that, short-term rentals, accessory dwelling units. Those have standards associated with them. And we have temporary uses as well in a table that shows what districts the temporary uses are allowed in and where they're not allowed, and how long what kind of duration you're looking at as far as the number of events per year and the number of days per event. So, for example, commercial outdoor sales event is allowed, a business is allowed to do that 4 events per year, and each of those events can be a maximum of 7 days each. So trying to get as much detail in there as we can so that there's not just kind of vacuums or gaping holes for where there should have been regulations related to various items. Getting into Chapter 3, Building and Site Design, there are 7 sections in Chapter 3, and I'm going to use one slide for each of those sections. They're in applicability and purposes. There's a table that shows various levels of development activity, whether it's completely new development on a greenfield site or a redevelopment on an existing site, down to just a minor addition to a building. The more major, the more significant and big the development is, like again, a new development on a greenfield site is going to trigger all the different standards of this chapter. Whereas if somebody's just putting up a sign, a small change to a site, then only the sign standards, of course, would apply. So it's big changes equal compliance with all the different sections of the chapter, while small changes on a site require fewer sections to come into play for compliance. That's the gist of what this table is saying. Looking at site design, one thing to point out is the sustainability index. This is a table that shows different sustainable or environmentally friendly characteristics like solar panels, geothermal, skylights on roofs, green roofs, white roofs, different characteristics of a site or of a building, that if a site does have that, then they can use that to get more density than they would have normally had, or a little extra height of the building than what they would have had, more lot coverage than what they would have had if they hadn't had these sustainable or environmentally friendly features. So it's not mandating it, but it is trying to make it more attractive for a site to have some of these kind of features on it by giving, again, parking reductions or more sign area than what they normally could have had in exchange for these environmental features. For parking, loading, and access and stacking, almost everywhere has minimum parking ratios. 1 space per 300 square feet of office area is a standard for decades. But we also have a maximum parking spaces so that there's not an overabundance of parking, which can cause drainage problems. It can increase the heat island effect and these kind of things. Trying to have a cap on some of that. So having maximum parking standards as well as minimum parking standards. There's some special standards for RVs and campers and other commercial vehicles. We require in this draft, in this section, screening of loading areas, especially when they're adjacent to residential uses and residential districts. There are stacking requirements as well. There on the lower left, there's an image showing what stacking is. We're at a Starbucks or another restaurant like that, having space for cars to line up, to place their order and get their order at the window so that they're not going out into the street. And then there's driveway spacing and driveway width standards as well that are in this section. The next section has to do with trees, landscaping, and buffering. Each zoning district has a landscape ratio percentage, which means that individual site has to have a certain percentage of it be landscaped. For a suburban commercial district, that's going to be higher than something like an industrial district, just by what you would expect in those two different kinds of different environments, with a suburban area having more landscaping again and the industrial less landscaping. There's heritage tree preservation requirements, where if a tree on a site meets the criteria for being a heritage tree, then it has to be preserved. There's standards for parking lot landscaping, again earlier showing how trying to reduce the heat island effect and drainage issues that can come along with large parking areas. There are different amounts of buffering required, where if you're talking a suburban commercial district that's next door to a suburban residential district, then there's going to be a certain amount of width of a buffer required and a certain amount of plantings within that buffer. But if it's industrial next to suburban, then that's going to be a much wider buffer and a lot more plantings within it, because that's a lot of impact that industrial property could have on that residential area that's next to it. And so the industrial property would, if it's newly developed, would have to provide a very large or very wide, well-planted buffer in between it and the residences that it could be next to. Then finally, for this section, there's some flexibility built in there where if an applicant has a certain landscaping design that doesn't meet the letter of the law as far as the landscaping requirements, there can be some flexibility in that, and they can exceed some provisions in exchange for sort of having less landscaping, maybe where it wouldn't be practical or needed on a site. And keep in mind that any decision of a staff member from the town is appealable to the BZA if someone is aggrieved by that decision. For signs, there are a lot more graphics added and modern graphics than what you would have had before that illustrate each of the sign types. There's signs that are listed as exempt from regulation, like government signs or other kinds of signs that are kind of either needed and a necessity that that a government might have to put up for notice of a rezoning or something like that. There's rules for permanent signs, for temporary signs. There's certain types of signs prohibited in certain districts. Certain kinds of materials are prohibited for constructing a sign. And the regulations are content neutral. That means that's in compliance and in response to a Supreme Court decision in about 2015 that said that towns and cities can't regulate signs based on their purpose or based on what they say. Instead, we have to base them on structural characteristics. So instead of a real estate sign, you can't say that anymore. It has to be like an H-frame sign. Or instead of a apartment sign, you have to say a wall sign or a monument sign or something like that. So that's part of what the sign standards say. As far as the outdoor lighting section in this chapter, there are rules about not bleeding up into the night sky or into the sky, not encroaching onto other properties, not encroaching into the right-of-way and causing a traffic hazard. Those kind of things are pretty typical for many places as far as their outdoor lighting. Then finally, Daniel mentioned for this chapter a section on public art that applies to sort of larger non-residential developments that are 15,000 square feet of building area or more. They have to either install with town approval or contribute to a fund, an art piece that of a certain value. The property owner has to maintain it, and then if there's something proposed that Daniel or other staff members in the future might not be sure about, they can refer that to the town council for their decision on that particular proposal and installation for public art. Subdivision standards, just only wanted to give one slide for that chapter, but the subdivision standards are the technical standards that are really heavily related to like civil engineering for public facilities like streets and easements and sidewalks, utilities, drainage, those kind of things. Right-of-way widths are part of that, as well as pavement widths of street. There's rules for naming streets and for having street lights and the spacing of them, and street signs and how they have to be designed. There's information on sidewalk installation and also extension of water and wastewater. For environmental management, that chapter mostly consists of floodplain related provisions, and those are just carried over from what the town already had. Chapter 6 is administration. It lays out the different bodies, including you all as the Planning Commission, and what their authority is, whether they make recommendations or final actions. It gives some high-level kind of rules of procedure related to membership and vacancies and things of that nature. Chapter 7 is important, probably in the second half of LDO, the most lengthy and important chapter, I would say, development review provisions. It lays out all the different review procedures, whether it's text amendments or rezonings or creation of a historic district, variances, all the kinds of different procedures that someone could ask for, and gives the rules for them. And one of the main ways it gives the rules is in a big table, like I have an excerpt for on the screen, where the table shows the name of the application. So we'll say, as an example, a zoning map amendment or rezoning, the timing of a submittal for that, in this case, prior to establishing a land use or a building type that would be prohibited in the current district. It gives an expiration for if you get that approval and you never follow through with it. An example would be like a sign permit. If someone received a sign permit and then never built the sign, then after a certain amount of time, that sign permit would expire and be null and void. The next couple of columns there show who makes a recommendation on the request and who takes final action. So in the case of a zoning map amendment, again, the planning director makes a recommendation to the planning commission. Then you all make a recommendation, to the town council, who then takes final action on it. And then finally, the final column there is public notice and what kinds of public notice are needed, whether it's published or posted for the property or mailed out in the case of mailing out notice to surrounding property owners. Then there's rules later on that have to do with what the content of the notice is, the radius of notification for a mail out, and those kind of things. But the table is trying to set everything sort of at a glance in one location, in that spirit of consolidating information. This is what that table is doing. Chapter 8, it deals with nonconformities or grandfathering. So it sets up for rules for uses or structures or lots or development standards or signs that were legally established at one time, but over the years, whether from previous updates or previous text amendments or through this effort, those uses or structures or signs have become non-conforming. We can't say that the house that somebody lives in, if it's a non-conforming, residential structure or residential use, can't say that they can't live there anymore. It's just that, that property can't expand anymore. Or if it were the opposite, if it were a manufacturing facility that's in a residential district, that manufacturing facility can't expand in the future. It can continue to stay in business, it just can't expand. There's also other rules in this chapter about abandonment. If a non-conforming use ceases for 6 months, then it's considered abandoned and it wouldn't be able to be opened again unless that property owner could get a rezoning to the correct district that would allow, whatever land use used to be there to come back. Second to last chapter, chapter 9, enforcement and remedies. It lists out what are considered violations. And it says, if you were in a violation under the old LDO, then you're still in violation under this one unless the rules change to where suddenly you're not in violation anymore. But those old penalties and old fees or whatever you would still apply. They're just no longer accruing penalties. It describes activities that constitute a violation. It provides the steps that the town has to go through for notifying a person of a violation on their property, provides remedy for the town to try to get compliance, short of going to court. There can be stop work orders issued. There can be withholding payments or withholding permits on the property other than permits needed to fix whatever's wrong. There's several things that the town can do before going to court. That includes, the possibility of going to court as well, at which point, a judge would be in control of what kind of fines or what kind of, penalties are in place there. The final chapter of this LDO is construction acronyms and abbreviations. The rules of construction spell out what we mean when we say shall versus may, or if there's a list of items and we say and versus what we mean by are, or and versus or. It delegates responsibility, so we don't always, 100 times on a single page say the director or his or her designee over and over. We can say just the director, and it's understood that that also includes, people under the director. Gives rules for rounding, gives rules for if we say that a decision has to be made within so many days, then that means calendar date. This rules of construction just tries again to say in one place something so we don't have to continually repeat it throughout the LDO. There are acronyms and abbreviations as well. What do we mean by ZBA, or what do we mean by the initials for plan development or plan unit development? Those are spelled out, and then of course definitions are in chapter 10 as well for for zoning related terms and land development related terms. So a summary of the primary changes before I stop here. Reduction of zoning districts from 21 to 12. This is helpful for administration, helpful for streamlining, and several other things. Reduction in planning jargon and legalese so that the document's easier to understand. The public art requirement for certain non-residential developments that are a little larger than typical. The use of modern graphics and illustrations. You've seen some of them in this presentation. The use, this LDO will be hosted on Encode Plus, which is sort of like MuniCode, but it's our hosting platform where graphics are handled better than MuniCode does. We even have a partnership with MuniCode where sometimes they'll give us codes that are heavily illustrated that they aren't able to handle the illustrations for. So it's a way to, again, make the document as user-friendly as possible. A few more improvements and changes before I wrap up. Just instead of being sort of vague on certain things, like using terms like strongly encouraged, well, a legal document it's hard to say strongly encouraged in a legal document. So instead, we use terms like required. The change with density, where if a person in a development, an applicant dedicates more open space, they get a little more density as a reward, and then the public gets that amenity of the open space to enjoy is a change. The thorough and detailed work on the with the Board of Architectural Review and an architectural consultant on the architectural overlay district, spending several weeks, more than several weeks, staff did with those folks to provide improvements to the architectural overlay district. A new zoning map, which Daniel has, I believe, probably plotted out, and to match up with the new terminology for the different zoning districts is the final change, big picture change. Then just a few highlights that I bolded. You know, this project, as I said, actually started longer ago than I was thinking, February of 2023, almost 2 years ago to the date that this project launched. So going through several milestones, they're now closer to the bottom, mid-September to mid-October, having this document available online for people to comment on if they so desired. And then now here we are, January and February, with the adoption process. So I did this presentation a couple of weeks ago, or a couple of days ago, I guess, actually, to both the ZBA and the BAR for their thoughts. And so they've been brought into the loop. What lies before you is, of course, any questions you may have for me, also to conduct your typical kind of public hearing and make a recommendation to town council, who will have 2 readings and a hearing, as Daniel mentioned earlier. So I'll stop and open it up to any questions anyone might have on this document from the commission. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Brian. Really appreciate that. I just want to reiterate a little what Brian was saying at the end. We have taken this to the Board of Zoning Appeals and the Board of Architectural Review for their respective areas. Obviously, there's not a requirement for them to adopt this ordinance, but my goal and Brian's goal was to try to have a unified front, if you will. So we did bring it through them for them to have their comforts and their areas of where zoning appeals has their special exceptions and appeals and et cetera. And then the BAR with their chapter 3 on design and development there. And both boards did give their unanimous recommendation to the Planning Commission for their respective chapters. And then I just wanted to kind of touch on the map amendment. We gave you, we've handed out a draft zoning map for the revised zoning districts that Brian has hit on, and I'll just touch on it. If you'll notice, the biggest change you'll see, again, a huge reduction in just a lot of redundant zoning districts. But I'll highlight things like, so if you look at the dark blue that's kind of in the bottom left, or what would I guess be southwest there, that's SU for like semi-urban. That's like your Abney Hills, Ashley Oaks areas. If we were to look at that, it'd be the equivalent of R8, which is what they're currently zoned. Or if we kind of jump back up to the north in the big red area where it says PD, to Brian's point, planned developments really are becoming kind of a thing of the past, because it used to be sort of an ultimatum or an alternative to get not only more density, but get a more universal type development or stuff like that. But in modern days, we got things like mixed use, we got better zoning standards that allows more versatility and those kinds of things. But since this town already has such a major development, i.e. Cobblestone, that was adopted as such, we left the planned development district in, and simply because for those reasons, because that is a very large development, and it'd be kind of difficult to sort of explain that with another zone district. But the green, if you'll notice, the town center zone districts that's the same zone district we currently have. We did strengthen a few of the business requirements related to under the design side of things and the architectural overlay side of things. But essentially, town center really focuses on all of your frontage streets of your primary roads in your town. So Wilson, that we call Main Street, McNulty's, Blythewood roads, going across east-south, some of Langford, those areas that you would kind of call your town anchor or your town center. Town center is our strongest commercial zone district that has the highest requirements for architectural and those types of things. So that's some of the explanation behind that. And then, of course, we kept the areas on the outline areas, like the SRs and RUs. Those are still rural, basically, zone districts as they are today, with the larger lot sizes that you would see, and the more what we would kind of call equine types of community areas or agricultural, folks who want a little more lot and land space, so to speak. And then last, I'll just kind of, obviously the LI, which is the yellow, we all know what that is. That's Scout. So clearly we didn't change any of their zone. But other than that, we did add the hospitality district, and that was to kind of, because hospitality district for like hotels and things are quite unique from other zone districts. So they really do deserve kind of their own zone district, because there's a lot of things related to height restrictions and things. Like town center only has a 3-story height restriction. Well, obviously a hotel wants to be taller than that. And then for residential zone districts, it wouldn't comply. So it kind of has its own. And then we do have a little bit of mixed use that complies best with the town's current, mixed use zone district it has. And we just kind of left those. So I'll leave it with that, and just those are some of the last explanations on that, and Brian or I will take any questions that the Planning Commission may or may not have.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Steins. I really like the way that we've streamlined it down here. I think makes it a lot more easy to understand than the letters and numbers.
Right.
And the color helps too on this one. I was able to find cobblestone quite easily.
Yeah, exactly.
Cobblestone and Scout stand out.
Right. It is a little more relevant. Instead of saying, R20, it's like, what does R20 mean? It's like, well, that's a rural district. Just put a RU and call it rural.
Right.
Call it what it is.
It's a lot easier to remember. My only question is, after the commission reviews and makes recommendation, and because that inverted pyramid, we got there pretty fast. Like y'all saying, it's been like since 2023. I can't believe we're at that bottom part for adoption already.
Yeah. It didn't feel that way internally, but
my heart goes out to you for that. But I'm excited for us to arrive at that phase in the near future where we could actually click through it and hover over those words and do quick research for the ideas that pop up as we try to navigate the exponential growth of the town and where things are going, so we could, I guess, do a better job as commissioners with the streamlined product. After our part today, and we move that up to council, I noticed we had maybe 3 more months of dates on there.
Roughly. So if tonight is a go, then we would have our first reading at this month's council meeting, which would be the end of the month. So, we'd be at the end of February. 24th. So about 3 weeks from now. And then that'd be the first reading. We'd obviously give kind of an overview of where we're kind of at, kind of get everything going. And then the second and final, or in the public hearing, would be in March. So it'd be the end of March. Gotcha. And that would be where we would, that's where everybody in the town will see a lot of advertisement, the whole 2-week the conspicuous notice type of things that we see. So Brian and I, we've talked, and I've talked with Pete, our attorney. We've got kind of, I think, a good plan for that. We're going to have a lot of the large 5x6 banners made and put them in all of our kiosks. And we'll have some of our H-frame signs made and get those posted in some of the more gateway and prominent areas of town. It'll be widely advertised for the final and public hearing. Like I say, good, bad, or indifferent throughout the process. There's been a good amount of engagement from the public, but we've not been met with any opposition to date on anything, with the exception of maybe just a couple of random comments here and there, usually related to like a scout situation or something, but we obviously know that's sort of a different animal. We can't really gauge this process on that. And I'll go as far as to say that while this is a monumental step and a very big project for the Planning Commission to get to and do, I mean, this is something that all planning commissions should be really happy and excited about. Once it's adopted, it's not in granite. So if you get, while we've done everything that we possibly can to hopefully cover and have as good of an ordinance going forward for the next decade or so, you know, a year or so down the road, if you're looking at something, it's like, man, I wonder if we have a district for this or a use exception for that. You can always do a text amendment or make that recommendation to council if there's a justified reason. But I don't, you know, I just want you to understand that, you know, this is a big process. This is an adoption, but it doesn't mean you can't touch it for the next 10 or 20 years or anything like that. So if staff or anybody does catch a little something, you can always bring forth an amendment to that. So for what that's worth.
Yes, sir.
Yep.
I don't have any further questions. Commissioners, do you have any questions?
I just had a comment or two. I know I read the whole thing over Christmas break and sent Daniel about 60 comments, mostly grammar police kind of things, misspelling. And they took care of all of it, except there were two items which, when you sent me an email saying they were going to take care of this, as mentioned these. I'm not going to hold up the approval. On page 20, there's a list of streets that come under the commercial building facade requirements. Locklear Road is still on there. What's left of that's not going to be commercial, is it?
You're right. No, that's right.
It's listed on two different lists, one right after the other on page 20, I believe.
Okay. Page 20, Locklear Road, and that's part of one of the.
Right. And
yeah.
then the other one, on page 245, item K7, there's something about fill not being used in coastal high hazard areas. It just seems so inappropriate unless we're going to annex 150 miles to the east. I don't think, you know.
Right.
Yeah.
Just a little bit about that. So that section is basically the floodplain management side of things. It's just one of those sections of an ordinance where 90% of it does not apply, but for just the sake of not having to reinvent or come up with something, we kind of just left it as is. Now, we can certainly remove that section K on that page about the fill or what have you, but to be honest, that whole chapter is really non-applicable for the town of Blythewood, because we don't even participate in the FIRM program, which is the flood insurance rate map through the FEMA program. And so we actually don't have any floodplain or flood zone areas that we even manage here. So really the whole chapter is just kind of not applicable. But for the sake of whatever, I mean, we saw a little taste, I guess, with Helene or something, but I don't think any of us are really going to be alive if Blythewood starts dealing with coastal floodplain areas. But you know, but anyway, I don't know. But if Brian, he's listening in. We can revisit that and just we could pull that out.
Everything else was addressed and
Right.
and two other things were explained tonight. So.
Yeah, yeah. And I do appreciate you. That was very admirable of reading that thing word for word. If you guys could have seen the amount of, I mean, a comma here, you know, a capital B. I'm talking, Bill, I think you read it more than me maybe, but.
394 pages.
Yeah, right.
I mean,
It's
kudos
not,
to you.
yeah, it's not light reading. You can tell you're in the scholar college area reading area because yeah, hats off to you, brother. So.
Any other questions, commissioners? All right, with that, I think we are ready to speak on it. Is there a motion on the floor to,
Yeah, I'll make the motion to make the recommendation to town council for this 2025 LDO to be approved.
all right, got a motion from Commissioner Taylor, is there a second?
To include those updates that were just mentioned.
Yeah, we can. Yeah. Like I said, even though the whole chapter is really non-applicable, we can, for the sake, we can remove those couple things.
Validating the
Yeah,
list.
especially the locklear and the fill side. Yeah, because that really is completely irrelevant. So yeah.
A second.
All right, got a motion and a second, and with that, we will vote. All in favor of making the recommendation to push this forward, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, say no. The ayes have it.
Fantastic.
All right, and with that, I'm looking for a motion on the floor to adjourn, if there's nothing else.
There's no citizen comment, right? Yeah, I see, so.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes.
Don't think there is, but.
Yeah.
I know
Everybody
that.
know. Oh, no.
Yeah.
No,
If there is, they're going to have to phone in, right?
We didn't draw quite the crowd that the town council drew, so.
they weren't here to see us. I thought, I told them we had pizza.
I thought that's why everybody was here. They were gonna stay for it. No, there's nothing.
All right, I'll make the motion to adjourn.
Second. All right, we got a motion and a second from Commissioner Tomes. And with that, we'll close out. I appreciate everybody's patience. Today was, and I know you'll be moving on soon. My hat's off to you. And as an emergency manager, Western North Carolina took some huge hits that I can only compare to where we were back around the time of Hugo, maybe no, way worse up there. So for you to go up there and take on that project, my hat's off to you, sir. And it's been a pleasure to serve the town with you.
Yeah, I appreciate the, going on 2 years, a little over 18 months here. I had ambitions of it being a little longer, but things happen, but I am humbled at the opportunity to go into a town that has been significantly devastated by Helene. We definitely got a long road ahead up there with Army Corps and FEMA and the whole 9 yards rebuilding. They lost about half their downtown, and so, Western North Carolina are very resilient people, and I feel optimistic we'll be moving forward. And I appreciate you guys, and I think this is one big step for the town of Blythewood, despite the other things. And I think you guys are really off to a good start on this, and I'm glad you'll be able to work with it. So I'll walk it up to the first reading, and then, bar no issues, I would like to think that there shouldn't be any reason for council to move forward with this. So.
Yes, sir. Thank you. And we hope you come back to visit us after a couple of more elections.
Yeah, that's
Should look a little nicer.
yeah, right. Yeah, absolutely. I've been in Blythewood since I was a teenager. So
Okay. I remember when all this was country out here because I'm from Columbia. So.
Right. Yeah.